I think we both wish we had more exposure to was Travis Etienne. We do have one share on a team that we split with Abib Agbatoba, where we kind of took him begrudgingly, Scott. But man,
just to put mildly, I think I scolded Abib. Yeah. I gave him the hardest time. Like, oh, you took Etienne? Why do we have Etienne on this? I don't want to back off my priors here. Like, I think it's only a matter of time until Basil Tootin goes crazy. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Fantasy football week 2 preview. Which players should you be enthusiastically putting in your lineup, and which players should you be very, very worried about? School of Scott Fantasy Football Podcast, Scott Barrett and Theo Greminger every week right here on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. Scott, it's good to be back. We're actually talking about some meaningful production on the field. Week 1 is in the books. It feels like just yesterday, the two of us were drafting a team with Rich Rebar. That team did really, really well this past week. Some other teams that we have need to do a little catch up. Week 1 was very, very weird. But one player you were enthusiastically on all summer long, I gave you a little pushback. I gave Graham Barfield a little pushback. Christian McCaffrey. There was the fear and trepidation in the marketplace with the late calf injury news. Bijan Robinson was getting pushed up in drafts. And then lo and behold, Christian McCaffrey comes out. It is simply dominant usage-wise, about as much as he can handle. And now we have George Kittle set to miss as much as 5 weeks with a hamstring injury. Just how valuable is Christian McCaffrey to fantasy managers? What can we anticipate for San Francisco and how they are going to handle this George Kittle injury?
Yeah, I mean, what a roller coaster of emotions that just perfectly encapsulates, the bet on Christian McCaffrey as a fantasy asset where, Saturday we were all like, oh, it's so over. And then of course, Sunday we're so back. We were wondering if it was going to be the same thing like last year where McCaffrey at the last second, this injury no one knew about, and he misses 6 weeks. No, Dr. Chow confirmed, based on the usage he got, there's no way there was anything wrong with his calf. It was just cramping, and it was much ado about nothing. And then what do we see in week 1 on Sunday is Christian McCaffrey-esque usage. What is that? That's the most valuable role that any player in fantasy has. And, typically pretty good efficiency from a healthy Christian McCaffrey. He went absolutely nuclear in terms of volume, leading all players in XFP by a pretty wide margin. 22 carries, a team high 28% target share. Just doesn't get any better than that. Production was great despite not scoring a touchdown. And so this is who he is. When healthy, the most valuable player in all of fantasy. It's just injury risk a lot higher than anyone else. But yeah, I'm feeling good about McCaffrey. Unfortunately, these 49ers are so unbelievably cursed. If God turned off injuries, they would have won their last Super Bowl. But the year before that year, the year after that, this year, they've been the most injury prone team in football every single one of those years. And we come into the season making jokes about how injury prone they are. And lo and behold, Brock Purdy is now dealing with a shoulder injury, a toe injury that we believe Dr. Edwin Porras believes to be turf toe that can and probably will impact accuracy, his ability to step into throws over these next several weeks. George Kittle, my favorite player, I think one of the most underrated players in all of football. Fortunately, one of the most injury prone players is now on IR. He's going to miss at least the next 4 games. Juwan Jennings picked up a shoulder injury. Their left tackle, Trent Williams, superstar, had his worst game probably ever of his career, spent some time in the blue medical tent. No updates on that. And yeah, I mean, and then ironically, Christian McCaffrey is the healthy one. What happens in the meantime without George Kittle? I think it's the Christian McCaffrey show because it has to be. I think it's the Ricky Pearsall show because it has to be. Looks like Juwan Jennings is going to play, but I don't know how much I trust him. He missed all of camp, probably a little rusty, probably doesn't know the playbook perfectly well. We don't know what kind of shape he's in. It's not a good sign he immediately got hurt. But yeah, these are more or less my thoughts on the 49ers. I know I just ranted here for quite a little bit.
No, I mean, you certainly nailed it. And everything that we're referencing on School of Scott, for almost everything that we talk about, besides occasional vibes that I drop in, are based on Scott's Everything Report, which is appointment reading for anyone who wants to win in fantasy football. And every piece of data that Scott pulls for the Everything Report comes from Fantasy Points Data Suite, the best source of anything data or analytics that you can imagine in fantasy football. Both of those things are available to you with the Fantasy Points subscription. You can use the code Theo for 15% off. So let's backtrack it though, Scott. You mentioned XFP. And every week on School of Scott, we want to take a dive into a specific thing from Fantasy Points data. And shout out to all the people that supported the show throughout the summer, watched our YouTube streams, and listen to every single podcast. But we do have people who have been, taking a little summer off, a little chilled out, and now they want to come back and win in fantasy. Why don't you explain what XFP is to them?
Yeah, it's expected fantasy points. It's just the best approximation of value. What it does, it takes every carry by down and distance to the end zone, every target by down and distance, air yards associated, and distance from the end zone. And it just puts all of that together to give you one number. What is the worth of a player's volume? And in McCaffrey's case, is 22 carries, 28% target share, came out to 30.1 XFP, is how many fantasy points a perfectly average player would have scored with that volume. McCaffrey uses a little less. He ran a little bit bad with touchdown luck, was playing against stack boxes. All the injuries made his life a little bit more difficult. But yeah, it's just like the GOAT volume and usage stat, I think.
Yeah, we're always going to reference XFP right here on School of Scott. You mentioned Christian McCaffrey. I think that's sort of the low-hanging fruit, probably the RB1, the RB2, somewhere in the rankings this week. Make sure you check out our projections over at Fantasy Points every single week. Chris Wecht, one of the very best there is in the entire country on giving you fantasy football projections. That's also available to you with your Fantasy Points subscription. So we'll check back in, see what that's looking like end of the week. But one player who I think will get an increased amount of touches, and this is a boring name. Nobody's going to hear this name. He didn't even look good last week. But I think just based on what they have available to them offensively, based on how important McCaffrey is, I think Bijan Robinson will see some increased touches, take away some of those empty calorie ones so Christian McCaffrey can catch all the passes out of the backfield, have a chance inside the red zone. I think Bijan Robinson will get, let's say, 12 touches. I think that's pretty safe with Kittle out. But the player that's very exciting, Scott, and a player that we were on this summer, and you were definitely very, very on as the summer kept moving along, the big pivot at Fantasy Points with a lot of really sharp people in the building was going from Juwan Jennings to being all the way in on Ricky Pearsall. Jennings, of course, missed time with a holdout this summer. Pearsall, the vibes were immaculate. All the beat reporters said just how dominant he was. We saw how good he was to finish last season. An elite athlete, the Brett Whitefield, who is one of the best in the business, also Fantasy Points at evaluating talent. Brett has always been on this Ricky Pearsall track. We started to see it last week. He had the really big catch. For me, 7 targets in week 1 should be viewed as his floor moving forward, or at least until George Kittle comes back. How enthusiastic are you about Ricky Pearsall? Do you think he's a fringe wide receiver 1 this week? How are you rating him?
Yeah, I'm very excited. He had the 6th most receiving yards on the week, despite I think the 3rd worst catchable target rate. So really impressive. Those his 4 catches for 108 yards. I think volume is going to be good this week because it has to be. I do worry about efficiency if defenses are locking onto him, or more significantly, that catchable target rate as Brock Purdy deals with, we think, turf toe, which might make it harder to step into throws and hurt the accuracy a little bit. But yeah, I think you're looking at both Pearsall and Emeka Egbuka, the other rookie, as low-end wide receiver 2s at worst.
Yeah, I love it. And we'll talk about Egbuka shortly. One other player I just want to throw out, we mentioned Brock Purdy might potentially miss some time. It seems like he's trending towards playing. He's very tough, doesn't miss a lot of time in general, but we have this Kyle Shanahan being linked to Mac Jones way back in the draft process. When San Francisco selected Trey Lance, we thought like up until the day that it could be Mac Jones with that San Francisco 49ers pick. So now we could actually potentially see a Mac Jones week. Mac Jones last year was pretty good for Brian Thomas Jr. He had a bunch of spike weeks with him. So I don't think like anything, if Mac Jones started a game, especially against New Orleans this week, I wouldn't necessarily adjust anything. Would you adjust your expectations if Jones does start, or is McCaffrey and Pearsall just sort of locked in with usage?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are kind of good vibes for like the players that matter. We saw what BTJ did with Mac Jones. His numbers with Mac Jones so much better than Trevor Lawrence. Horrible numbers week 1, and then Mac Jones' career target rate targeting running backs, how often he targets running backs, would be 3rd among all 32 starters. So that's another positive sign for Christian McCaffrey. So, just given his history there, just getting it to the guy who matters, targeting running backs. I don't think it's a big downgrade right now.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. One great thing you had, first of all, like anybody listening to this that hasn't been listening all summer, the Everything Report, when I say it's appointment reading, it's absolutely appointment reading. You and Ryan Heath went like above and beyond with this article this week. It was a ton of data for you guys to unpack, and it's really just a fantastic piece. But you have your 11 key takeaways, and number 1 was just terrific. It's week 1 is a liar. Always. Only slappies overreact to week 1. Then you gave a little additional relax. Seriously, dude, chill out. So talk about this, Scott. It's a not overreacting. It's reacting to the usage, not overreacting to the counting stats. Like, what is your general vibe with this takeaway?
Yeah, anyone who plays DFS knows week 1 is always like the most random, chaotic week. And then you look back on things in week 6 and you're like, yeah, how the heck did that happen? Like, that doesn't even make any sense. It's the weirdest, drunkest, least serious week of all weeks. 1 is just a 1-game sample size. You really can't overreact to it. You remember in FFPC leagues, people spending all of their fab on Isaiah Likely. He had his best game of the season in week 1 last year, and he never came close to it again. Or Alan Lazard. Defenses always have an advantage early in the season. A lot of these teams are rusty. Their timing's off. Maybe it's a new play caller, a new playbook, a new system, or you have new teammates who are a little bit inexperienced together. I think ever since the NFL took away that extra preseason game and gave us an extra regular season game, it's now becoming like week 1 is just an extension of the preseason. And then, if any of that isn't like all persuasive to you, just look at Joe Burrow throughout his career in early September. Some guys are just slow starters, but yeah, I mean, like, don't overreact. Just a weird week. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes. I really wouldn't be surprised. Like heading into Sunday Night Football, I thought the stat was crazy. Only 3 teams scored 30 points. It was the Steelers, Jets, and the Colts, which might have been like the 3 teams you least expect. And then the Jets Steelers matchup had the lowest over under of the week by like 5 points. Would we be totally shocked if the Steelers don't score 30 points again the rest of the year, or the Jets? I don't think so. So again, yeah, it's just a lot of randomness week 1s. Don't overreact. You really give it another week or 2. I think Adam Harstead had this great article that said, current season stats don't outpredict ADP until about week 6. So yeah, definitely don't panic bench or panic sell a guy you drafted early.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you, especially on panic selling and panic benching guys. You sort of want to trust the process from the summer. I do think one big takeaway, and one thing that's great about fantasy points, especially with the fantasy points data suite, is the usage. Usage is something that's a big takeaway for me, where guys maybe we underrated in the summer. And now we're not talking about if a guy just catches a 40-yard bomb touchdown and you say, oh, look, the guy scored 15 points this week. But it's if a guy played a much higher snap percentage than we anticipated, if a guy had a higher number of targets or air yard share, and he was on the field a lot more. Sometimes in the past, drafters would sort of ignore that guy, and then all of a sudden week 2, he does the same thing. Those are the kind of players I'm looking to add on the waiver wire. Make sure you're checking out our waiver wire show on Fantasy Football Daily. Joe Dolan, Tom Brawley, and myself every single week on Fantasy Points YouTube and also on the podcast. We talked about a lot of those guys, some like deep cut guys like Kayshon Boutte, who maybe we weren't on, that I think maybe have a pathway, but I think you completely nailed it. People that overreact and go crazy, those are the players that sort of get left holding the bag in fantasy. Trust the process throughout the summer. Week 2 can look a lot better than week 1. Guys like Jamar Chase are not going to have clunkers week in, week out. We're going to see a bunch of bounce back candidates this week. And great stats, Scott, on the teams who scored 30 points. I think scoring overall will be much higher. Unders were hitting rapidly this past week. Let's talk about one backfield that we do want to react to. And this is one which gave you a lot of, like, let's call it Exodia panic. Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. This is the one where I think tilted you the most this past weekend. And we can talk about it a little bit. The week 1 split was not like completely clean. It was a slight lean, but it's clean enough where it looks like Kenneth Walker managers should be in a little bit of panic mode, and Zach Charbonnet managers maybe have a pathway to flipping the script here. Is that a strong enough takeaway? Like, how do you think this thing is going to play out? Your general takeaways from the usage you saw and just your general vibes with this backfield.
Yeah, this was absolutely awful. I think this is like the worst I've ever felt for about an Exodia player in week 1. But with that being said, I'm still not quite panicking. It's just so weird. It was so weird week 1. So Clint Kubiak is the outside zone guy, the motion guy, the play action guy. It's all they talked about all offseason. Mike McDaniel's like, yeah, we got the play action guy, the motion guy, the outside zone guy, because we want to do all those things, because we think Kenneth Walker's amazing at outside zone. We think, motion's really going to benefit Jaxon Smith. And then we saw none of that week 1. And then Mike McDaniel came out and like really threw Kubiak under the bus, which made it seem like maybe Kubiak just totally shit his pants in this matchup because he's going up against his childhood friend and former boss, Kyle Shanahan. I have no idea, but everything about that was weird. That said, I do think we have to accept the harsh, bitter reality that this is way more of a committee than we were expecting, way more a committee than the coaching staff had been intimating. It's possible, he kind of took all those days off in practice. Maybe he needs some more time to ramp up, like all those. I think the most likely scenario here is it's basically Breece Hall, right? Where I was much more bullish on Breece Hall than you. I think I was lower on him than ADP, but I was saying, it looks like it's going to be a committee. It looks like the coaching staff wants a committee, but because I think Breece Hall is so much more talented than Braylon Allen, he's eventually going to, seize the lion's share of the work and become a valuable fantasy player. And I think that's what we're looking at now is, this is a committee of sorts. But luckily, I still really do believe Walker is the more talented running back. And I would bet on him eventually regaining the majority of the work in this backfield. That's my lean. But again, you have to color this with it's week 1, and I'm like almost never going to really fully panic on a player I was convicted in heading into week 1.
Yeah, and I will say it was weird because Walker was on the field for the first drive, and it was like a very short drive. You wonder if they would have gotten a little bit more rhythm, just even from the jump. Walker could have broke off a long one. So you start unpacking all these scenarios in your head. I think that one thing for me is we never saw this with Ryan Grubb last year. Ryan Grubb last year, you could set your watch to it. It's Kenneth Walker averaged 16.5 points per game last year, was a locked-in player in your lineup week in, week out, looked like a league winner. When we did those early podcasts in the first half of the year, Scott, we're like, Kenneth Walker can be a league winner. The production was fantastic, took a big step forward as a receiver. But then in the weeks where Zach Charbonnet had the backfield to himself, he was also terrific. He had 3 top 8 finishes. He had an RB1 overall finish on a week. So for me, just the fact that we're seeing Clint Kubiak open to having a committee backfield, even if it was just for a week, that's like a new wrinkle for us with Seattle. So to me, the Pittsburgh game is going to be really, really tilting for a lot of managers. Pittsburgh, that defense was run on well We're going to talk about Tanner Engstrand and the Jets coming up, but this is a tilting one for fantasy managers for sure. One player, though, that we have to give Clint Kubiak props to, and I was in Vegas drafting FFPC and FFC, and I was sitting at the 1-2 turn, and I had a Jamar Chase at the 101, and I'm sitting there at the turn, and I pushed Jaxon Smith-Njigba up. I take him there, and JSN for me, I took him ahead of Ladd McConkey. I think it was uncomfortable to do so at the time, but I feel really, really strong about adding that share at the end of the summer. JSN, unbelievable usage. Scott, this was a conversation we had with so many of our guests this summer about which wide receiver should you be selecting inside of round 3. And right now it looks like JSN, based on this week 1 usage, is going to crush his ADP.
Yeah, I mean, this really just reminded me of Puka Nacua usage, prime Cooper Kupp-esque usage. He led all week 1 wide receivers in first read target share, receiving yardage market share, targets per route run, XFP per route run, threat rate, and just about any other stat you can think of. And like looking within the context of this offense, what do you see? You see a ton of intermediate routes, a ton of horizontal routes, and you see a lot of 2 wide receiver sets, which are massive for fantasy. They're amazing because you have less target competition, so you're more likely to receive a target. And yeah, I think if Cooper Kupp doesn't score 18 or more fantasy points this week, you're looking at JSN as a mid-range fantasy wide receiver 1 every week moving forward. And what are the odds of Cooper Kupp scoring 18 or more? Probably pretty low. He looks pretty dusty. And there were 0 positive vibes on him all throughout training camp. So yeah, JSN looks like a mega week 1 winner. And I don't think that's an overreaction.
Yeah, 62% targets per route run, 57% target share. It just insane. And my biggest takeaway was there was a lot of fear in the community about him losing out on this valuable slot role, the full-time slot role, where last year on Fantasy Points data, I believe he was the league leader of players that played a significant snap share. And this past week, he was sub 40%. So he's still getting work in the slot, but he's mostly moving around the offense and they're featuring him. I think this could be a massive year for JSN. Really, really excited about shares that I have for him. And we're going to look for him this week for sure. Scott, this is a weird one because Philly wins the game, but I'm not a big Kevin Patullo fan. I think that Patullo right now, there's some troubling signs as to just how fantasy friendly this offense can be. Of course, Saquon Barkley looks great, but your general takeaways for Patullo taking over for Kellen Moore after seeing it for 1 game?
Yeah, I mean, it was really disappointing. I thought it was a really poorly called game, but I wonder how much of a pass we would need to give him because I do think A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith were both reeling from injury. Both missed a good chunk, if not the majority of August. And A.J. Brown, you look at the numbers, you look at the ass, it was the worst ass he's ever had, 0% win rate. He didn't win a single route in week 1. He looked like he was running in slow motion. I think he's not fully healthy. And so, maybe that limits what the offense can do. But yeah, I would have liked to see more motion. I would have liked to see more play action, more targets to the boundary, and all these different things. But again, it is just week 1. And I think maybe the bigger story here is if you're an A.J. Brown owner, it might take a few weeks for him to get up to full speed and full health.
Yeah, it's a tilting one. And this week is a really kind of difficult game for Philadelphia on the road in Kansas City. You'd have to think that maybe they have to open things up a little bit more in that one. Not sure which way the usage is going to go. I mean, you obviously feel fantastic if you have Saquon Barkley. You feel really, really good if you have Jalen Hurts because he's just so effective as a runner. Dallas Goedert did some nice things last week. I think if you're talking about A.J. Brown continuing to be slow, I think that Dallas Goedert can sort of beat his ADP and be a player that you can plug in your tight end spot for the early portion of the season. And Devonta Smith, we've sort of seen this story before, Scott, where Devonta Smith has like a dud to start the year, and then all of a sudden, like a couple weeks later, puts up a really big one. So that Philly, I think, we'll figure it out. What about the Detroit Lions? And this is one where the offensive line did not look like the offensive line of old. Green Bay completely manhandled them up front. And John Morton certainly doesn't look like Ben Johnson right out the gate. Your general vibes from this Lions team. One positive, I'll point out, Jahmyr Gibbs did give us 10 catches. Was that just an opportunistic thing? You think a little bit of changing of the guard? Your general vibes with Detroit and John Morton.
Yeah, I am buying into Gibbs getting a higher percentage of the backfield XFP than what we saw last year. Looking into the numbers, you have to be extremely underwhelmed and disappointed by what you saw from the offense and play calling. A much lower motion rate, a much lower play action rate than we've typically been accustomed to from the Lions. And to make matters worse, I mean, look at the Jets. Look at how good the Jets played. The Jets looked more like, under Tanner Engstrom, the former passing game coordinator, the Jets looked way more like the Lions than the Lions. And they looked unbelievably good. And Lions really struggled. What I will say here is that the offensive line really struggled. And they're still kind of getting their wings under them, and they lost some key players. And so, maybe Morton didn't fully trust this offensive line just yet, and he's going to work that stuff into the offense as they get their legs under them. But the flip side of that is, I was talking to some really smart football minds, much smarter than me, who were saying they think like the true measure of a play caller, a great play caller, is their ability to coach up an inferior offensive line and turn it into a good offense. So I don't know. I will just say, yeah, I was way more bullish on the Lions post Ben Johnson, and perhaps I should have, because it really looked rough in week 1.
Yeah, it absolutely looked rough. I think that this week is going to be an unbelievably intriguing game. You've got Ben Johnson and the Chicago Bears coming into Detroit, a game that Detroit is expecting to win. It's going to be extremely tilting if that Bears defense that gave up 3 fourth quarter touchdowns to Minnesota is able to sort of slow Detroit down again. I'll say one positive for me, Scott, and it's something I didn't even put on the show sheet, but it's a player that I know the two of us have a great deal of exposure to. You must have been happy to see Sam Laporta, even though the game flow sort of was in his favor. Really slow start for him last year, but comes out, has a really strong stat line in week 1. Do you think that's something that could be static, or you think this is something that was just a result of the game flow?
Yeah, well, it's also, he just looked really good. And, we remember last year, the stats were, final 6 weeks of the season, he looked like rookie season Sam Laporta. But up until that point, he looked like a random low-end tight end 1 for fantasy. And he came into the season hurt. He picked up another bad injury in the first month of the season. And so I really think that's what it was. He was just hurt last year, and he's healthy now.
Yeah, this was one where we're going to talk about a couple of breakout tight ends, but I do think the Laporta drafters, you talk about the health for him. This could be a sort of a post-type sleeper where we look back and we said, why wasn't he pushed up just a little bit higher? Just looks really good out there, really passing the eye test. You talked about Tanner Engstrand. Let's dive into it deeper. I live on Long Island. There's a lot of people were very disappointed at the loss because it was so competitive. But for me, the when I'm sitting there watching Sunday football, just sort of kind of how the sausage is made argument, I'm watching Red Zone like most people. And then I'm flipping over and watching the Jets because a lot of people I know are big Jets fans. My son is rocking the Garrett Wilson jersey. It's just the vibes here. A Sauce Gardner jersey for the little guy. So I'm watching this and I'm like, Tanner Engstrand, this guy gets it. And Scott, you mentioned how good they look and how Lions they are. It's the aggression. It's them utilizing their skill position talent at a fully full capabilities. For me, Justin Fields looked just terrific in this offense. The use of the RPO. You mentioned how good Breece Hall looked. Breece Hall looked really, really good. And Breece Hall was their second leading target earner. And how about Garrett Wilson? This was a low volume pass attack, but like we told you all summer, Garrett Wilson had the opportunity to be the highest target share earner in the NFL. Really strong start for Wilson. Is this the team that everybody defies and beats ADP? or should we temper our expectations?
Yeah, man. So I don't know. The vibes out of Florham Park in August were horrific. They were awful. It was like Zach Wilson was the quarterback. It's possible, it's just one game sample. There were awful teams last year that went crazy for one game. I think we need to see a little bit more. I think we're certainly encouraged. I think more than anything, I'm bullish on Fields being a super valuable fantasy asset. I think that sticks. I think there's probably going to be some really ugly weeks, but like coming out at the end of the year on a fantasy point per game average, I think you're looking at a mid-range QB1, low-end QB1, somewhere around there. But yeah, I think we need to give this a little bit more time, but certainly watching Justin Fields carve up a great defense like that was really impressive.
Yeah, and I'll say if I'm grading beat reporters collectively, I'm going to give the Jets beat reporters like a D+ for their summer coverage, because they told us about how this was going to be a split backfield, and they told us how Justin Fields is just not the guy, just how bad he looks every practice. Justin Fields, I think, is a gamer. And when he gets on the field, and just the natural progression of the NFL is going to look better than in like a very controlled environment. Just kind of my vibes there. Garrett Wilson, that's his guy. And Garrett Wilson, again, like I don't want to get fooled by this one. We've talked about Garrett Wilson, just how he's earned a ton of targets and really not turned them into smash seasons. But you do have the locker room narrative, the reconnection with his former college quarterback. The vibes are great. Breece Hall ran really, really well. This week, the Jets, it's a big one because they get Buffalo coming into MetLife. That game is going to be very lit. We did see Buffalo play this incredible game against Baltimore, but Baltimore ran all over them, and a sort of a similar narrative in a much better way, where it was a dynamic, mobile quarterback in Lamar Jackson with a running back that they couldn't take down in Derrick Henry. This could be another Breece Hall and Justin Fields game. I'm circling this one for week 2. Let's talk about something fun. Let's talk about Jacorey.
Let's talk about DraftKings.
let's talk about Jacorey Croskey-Meritt, and how, like, this podcast, again, we're not victory lapping here. We'll victory lap later in the year when you raise trophies and you win a bunch of money in your leagues. But anybody who listened to Fantasy Points podcast this summer, if it was a dynasty manager, you packed your Jacorey Croskey-Meritt bags in round 5 of dynasty rookie drafts. And if you were a best ball manager, you were drafting him inside of round 18. Scott, Jacorey Croskey-Meritt, there are some whispers out there. There's some like NFL podcasts this week that are calling him a dark horse candidate to be the NFL offensive rookie of the year, based on how good he looks, based on the quality of the Washington offense, and just the vibes there. Is this Alfred Morris part 2? Or is this going to be something like Philip Lindsay part 2? Any way you cut it, it's a good thing. What are your initial thoughts on JCM, a.k.a. Bill, a.k.a. Jacorey Croskey-Meritt?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Ryan Heath and I co-write the Everything Report, but I get final say, so I'll disagree with Ryan, or I'll just completely rewrite what he wrote. But generally, we agree, I would say like 95% of the time, and Ryan's brilliant. So sometimes he finds things that I didn't find, whatever, but he wrote up the Jacorey Croskey blurb, and I didn't touch it. And it was just about exactly what I would have said in any week, in any year over the past 5 years, which was basically that, although, he's a very likely high-end ADP beater, there's not a ton of upside here in this role, because the Brian Robinson role isn't very valuable. It's just the early down workhorse role in a committee. He'll probably get the red zone carries, but Lamar Jackson also gets red zone carries, but he's unlikely to get the target. So he needs hyper efficiency to even be in the mid-range, high-end RB2 conversation. And maybe he gets that, but blah, 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 blah. I think that's right. I think that's largely right. But I will also say, like, the vibes are just crazy. Like, and there's a chance we see like Bucky Irving levels of hyper efficiency. We remember what Bucky Irving did last year, despite, what was it? A 50% touch share in the second half, a 45% snap share. So that's in the range of outcomes. I really don't think there's league winning, league wrecking potential in terms of the upside. But I do think, I think you have a really valuable player. I think you got a guy who I would rank as, I don't know, a low end RB2 this week. And there's upside for, maybe a high end RB2 outcome. I know we see running backs differently, and you were driving, credit to you, driving this hype train back in June before anyone else. So what are your thoughts on this situation?
I mean, I feel good. And I keep bringing up Phillip Lindsay because I think, like, if we go back and look at Phillip Lindsay's year, of course, it was an undrafted free agent versus a 7th round pick. So we're sort of splitting hairs. The sample size and the draft capital, all that stuff, like the historical comp, it's kind of the same, but it's not exactly the same. But for me, it's the explosive run where JCM looked really, really good. He had a 42-yard run, Scott, and that's longer than any run Brian Robinson's had at any point in his career. And we heard Washington throughout the summer saying one of their goals offensively was to generate big, explosive plays in the running game. So I think that they're going to use JCM. I also think he's a capable receiver out of the backfield. I think we'll see that a little bit more. This game, they were so in control that we can't really take away a whole lot other than Croskey-Meritt looks really, really good. And Washington was 4th overall in rushing yardage. I agree with you that I don't think he's going to be a league winner in a sense, but I do think he's a player that you're going to be able to plug into your RB2 spot or your flex spot and feel pretty good about him being able to deliver a week that helps you win. And if you're a structural drafter who maybe a lot of like builds that I had this summer, some that I shared with you, we sort of will get our anchor RB and then take a bunch of shots on guys that we think could explode at the RB2 spot. I think Croskey-Meritt's going to help a lot of those hero RB drafters really get through. So really, really a fun one. We'll continue to talk about JCM throughout the season. Let's talk about Deebo Samuel, though. And Scott, this is one where the two of us were on Deebo Samuel, and I don't want to like victory lap because Deebo could break down at any moment. But the two of us sort of talked about it where, respect to a lot of people that we pod with or had on as guests, there wasn't a whole lot of Deebo vibes out there. I think people were very apprehensive about this, but I think the two of us saw this as an opportunity where Washington lacked yards after the catch last year. They lacked a wide receiver too. The beat reporters, the coaching staff, everything was just sort of lining up for Deebo. Usage-wise, week 1 went very, very well. He had a 19-yard touchdown run, which has always been in his bag. But what was interesting was he had 10 targets, caught 7 of them for, I believe, 77 yards. So, Deebo, that's a really strong stat line to start the year. What were your general takeaways from Deebo?
Yeah, I think you have to be highly encouraged. He had a 19-yard rushing touchdown. He had a team high 10 targets, 7 catches, 77 yards. And we sort of saw this coming. Terry McLaurin last year was not a high-end target earner. He's not even like a wide receiver 2, or top 24 in target share. And so, the targets were there, and we know Cliff Kingsbury is very much like a role guy. He has different roles in his offense, and there's that sort of Rondale Moore role where Deebo Samuel is the perfect fit for. If you just took, an average Rondale Moore season and gave him Deebo Samuel's typical yards after the catch per reception, you're looking at, a fantasy wide receiver 1. The one thing I'll say is, part of our bet on Deebo was Terry McLaurin missed 99% of training camp. And these wide receivers, when they come back, are kind of in the doghouse. They're kind of rusty. We don't know what kind of shape they're in. And so it takes them a while to get going. Historically, we really see that. So if Deebo keeps this up for another 3 or 4 weeks, maybe he's like a good sell high. And then you see Terry McLaurin start to come on. But I'm buying into this and was highly encouraged by everything we saw in week 1. It was everything we hoped for.
Yeah, really, really. I love seeing the rush attempt for me. Like, we get back to Deebo, it's like, what's peak Deebo look like? Peak Deebo in San Francisco was getting those rush attempts. Really, really strong one. And it also obviously helped him put up a really strong week to find the end zone. Let's pivot back to the running back position. We saw Bijan Robinson with that incredible catch and run in the first quarter that really boosted his week. Really, really strong receiving numbers from Bijan. But you can't be too happy about seeing Tyler Algier with this big of a rushing share in what was a very tight game.
Yeah, Bijan went off as a pass catcher. He had a 77% route share. I think that was a career high for him. But he had 12 carries and Tyler Algier had 10. That's, I think, something to worry about, not worry about yet in week 2, primarily because Bijan had 59 snaps, 83%. So it does seem kind of fluky for Tyler Algier, 10 carries on 18 snaps, 25% snap share. But it is something to keep an eye on moving forward. Because, I mean, you know, if Bijan's getting only 50, 60% of the carries every week, you know, that's not who you drafted him to be, which was basically second half of the season last year, Bijan, and Uber bell cow.
Yeah, I mean, in that scenario, he'd have to have 85 catches to be in the RB. Like it's not what I wanted to see at all. And it's not what I expected to see for sure. But man, he looks explosive as a pass catcher. So this one sort of remains to be seen. The running back that was opposite Bijan Robinson was Bucky Irving. And this was sort of a game where it wasn't like peak Bucky by any means. He finds the end zone, but there was some very promising usage takeaways from this you wrote about in the Everything Report.
Yeah, no doubt. So you just look at what he did last year. He was top 5 in fantasy points per snap. Every 2 snaps, he would give you a fantasy point. But he only had a 43% snap share. So just based on the 74% snap share he had in week 1, you know, if he maintained that efficiency, which granted is a big if, he would have given you 25 fantasy points per game. So that just kind of tells you the upside you have with Bucky. Should this usage stick? Should he be as close to as hyper efficient as he was last year?
Yeah, very, very optimistic about Bucky Irving. And I think that just the fact that what we saw from him down the stretch last year where he took over in this really strong role, and now it could be an even better role. I think this is one where over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about big scoring outbursts from Bucky. Another running back where I think we both wish we had more exposure to was Travis Etienne. We do have one share on a team that we split with Abib Agbatoba, where we kind of took him begrudgingly, Scott. But man,
he looked, put it mildly, I think I scolded Abib. Yeah. I gave him the hardest time. Like, oh, you took Etienne? Why do we have Etienne on this? Shout out to Abib. You know, we streamed a number of drafts with him. He's arguably the greatest high stakes fantasy football player ever. 2-time winner of the Big Gorilla, consecutive years even. So fantasy football millionaire legend, Abib, shout out. I will say, like, I don't want to back off my priors here. Like, I think it's just only a matter of time until Basil Tootin goes crazy. So you had Pete Prisco saying, they traded Tank Bigsby. So we would finally see Tootin in the Bucky Irving role, and a number of people, Jordan Schultz, reporting, he was a superstar in training camp. And so I don't want to back off my priors here. But yeah, for sure. I mean, it looks like Travis Etienne, it's a nice little ADP beater, potentially a bell cow for September. But I do have my priors here. What do you think, Theo?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just it's a smoke him if you got him situation. If you've got Travis Etienne, use him as long as you can here, because if you're a dynasty manager, you're not going to be able to really sell high, because I think the dynasty community is still sort of apprehensive about him after just such regression that we saw from him. But I think if you have him rostered, just start him until the wheels fall off. I'm with you. Basil Tootin now has another window of opportunity where maybe it's a situation like we saw with Devon Achane his rookie year, where it's going to be Basil Tootin rips off just a couple of really long runs in some big debut performance, or it could be a little bit more of a slow drip. But I do think at some point this year, Basil Tootin is going to have a window of opportunity. He is a fantastic stash, an even better one with Tank Bigsby, now a Philadelphia Eagle. So I'm with you. But Etienne, Liam Cohen just, produces at the running back position. So if you have Travis Etienne, you drafted him as an RB3, you can feel good about him giving you, I think, mid RB2 numbers moving forward. They play also the Bengals this week. And I think it's interesting. Dylan Sampson caught a ton of passes against the Bengals this past week. So I think Etienne's going to get opportunities as a pass catcher out of the backfield if they look to emulate a few things that worked for Cleveland. And I think Liam Cohen is the kind of coach that's going to look and see, what was this defense giving up? Can we attack them in the same direction? So we could see another strong week from Etienne. He's not going to have 160 rushing yards, but he could have another strong overall fantasy performance. Really disappointing stuff from Carolina. We'll touch on McMillan shortly. But Scott, let's pivot over. And we're not going to go over every running back. If you want to read about even more running back takeaways from Scott Barrett and Ryan Heath, subscribe to Fantasy Points, get access to the Everything Report. If you want to take that subscription to an even higher level, subscribe to Fantasy Points Data. Use the code Theo for 15% off any Fantasy Points package, and make the Everything Report part of your weekly. It's part of your weekly reads. It's even more than that. It just gets you ready to win in fantasy. Scott and Ryan go so deep, unpacking things way beyond the box score. It's just part of it. We'll call it an appointment read in fantasy football. One of the best possible articles for you as a fantasy manager. Let's pivot over to the quarterback spot. Scott, so I'll ask you this one, starting with 1 week of data here. Okay, so we've been able to see these guys play one game. If you could pick Drake Maye or Justin Herbert or Justin Fields as your quarterback for the fantasy football season, who would it be? Or would you be looking to sort of spread the wealth a little bit and have sort of split your access to these guys?
Oh God, this is the question everyone wants to know, and it's haunting me. I'm panicking a little bit on Drake Maye, or at least like just regretting it, because I entertained Justin Fields, I entertained Justin Herbert, and Dak Prescott and JJ McCarthy even as potential, and Daniel Jones as potential Exodias, and like all of them kind of looked more exciting than Drake Maye in week one. Brett Whitefield did not like the film. But I will say Drake Maye does get the nuts matchup this week. The Miami Dolphins, worst secondary in football. Daniel Jones just carved them up. So not panicking too much. Again, I really trust my priors a lot more than I trust week one typically. But yeah. If we were redrafting today, I would have Justin Fields over him. I would probably have Justin Herbert over him. Justin Fields this week, I think I'm starting as like a top 7 option.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Justin Fields, everything that we saw from a rushing perspective with Justin Fields is something we want from Drake Maye. Now, that was the game. It was also just a home game. It was sort of a lifeless one. I'm concerned. I do think we'll see more Travion Henderson this week. I think that there's been some quotes from Vrabel that they want to sort of open things up. Maybe they sort of had that explosive, development to their game a little bit more. Maybe that opens things up for Maye as a runner. But we talked about Justin Fields, and let's talk a little bit about Justin Herbert, though, because, Scott, I'm really excited about Herbert. Herbert looks completely comfortable. This is the third time in the history of the Chargers organization that a quarterback started the year with 3 passing touchdowns and 300 passing yards. And it was just the confidence level for Herbert, the opportunistic scrambling. You've often talked about what a plus athlete he is. You've made the comparison athletically between a Justin Herbert and a Josh Allen, and that's just something that they never really asked of him. But it looks like he's got the Baker Mayfield vibe where he'll just tuck it and go when it's presented to him. And it's a comfort level in year 2 of the Greg Roman offense. One other thing that I absolutely loved for Herbert was they have de-emphasized the tight end position, and it's a lot of wide receiver targets. And they actually didn't really pass to the running backs either. Hampton had 2 catches. But for me, the fact that Keenan Allen's back, Ladd McConkey's really, really good, and Quentin Johnston in this almost like red zone-y tight end type role, they've got the weapons for him to succeed. So you're curious your thoughts on Herbert and your takeaways with the Chargers kind of moving forward.
Oh yeah, I'm super bullish. Everyone was expecting this offense to be super run heavy, but Deebo and I did not think that. You remember on the School of Scott, we had a lengthy discussion talking about, the upside if that was the case. And like, you look at Harbaugh talk about Justin Herbert, he's saying like he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he doesn't get him an MVP this year and get him to the Hall of Fame eventually and 5 Super Bowls. And so, yeah, it's not surprising they were one of the top 3 teams in pass rate over expectation, especially given the matchup. Chiefs have maybe the best run defense in football, and we know they can score a lot of points. So, that played into it. But yeah, Herbert looked incredible. He was dealing. I was kind of more impressed that it was Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnson doing it. I loved how they utilized Quentin Johnson, which is to say with plenty of screens and short area stuff to take advantage of his yak and not his limitations as a separator. Keenan Allen, like, let's not forget, the dude had 13.5 targets per game with Herbert 2 years ago. They're BFFs, and he was good last year. Despite his advanced age, he was the top Chicago wide receiver in AS or yards per game minus screens. And so Justin Herbert has all these weapons. He has a great offensive line that he put a lot of investments in. And they have this, round 1 rookie running back who you love. So yeah, I think this could end up being, one of the top 7 offenses you'd want to be invested in for fantasy football.
Yeah, I love that. And this is a really fun game on Monday Night Football. We hope Brock Bowers plays. There was, of course, he's downplaying the severity of hurting his knee.
Hey, Dr. Chow was really nervous about that. He was saying he thinks this is most likely a multi-week injury.
Well, we'll see. I think that, the big I had in the waiver wire column and also with Joe and Tom is roster Michael Mayer. If you're a Brock Bowers manager, sort of treat him like you would a running back, pick up the handcuff for this one, especially because it's a 10 p.m. game on Monday Night Football, and there's no good options for you on Monday night to play at the tight end position. It's just a sort of a wasteland in that doubleheader. So Michael Mayer, if Brock Bowers were to miss, I think would be a low end tight end 1. But yeah, this is a really fun game because good vibes with that Vegas team, good vibes with the Chargers. It's in Vegas. And if the Chargers are who we think they are, a viable contender in the AFC, they go into Vegas and they win this one, Scott. So really have this one circled. Now, of course, the Chargers played on Friday. Really cool to get that Brazil game. Both Brazil games have been really fun. Philadelphia, Green Bay, and then this year, LA, Kansas City. But we had the game on Thursday, which was the NFL opener, Philadelphia, Dallas. Dak Prescott, your general takeaways, is there any reason to be concerned? Really disappointing to see those drops from CeeDee Lamb in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, a ton of drops. He had more dropped air yards than any quarterback had in any game last season. No, I was really impressed by his performance. The box score would not lead you to be all that impressed, and by the Schottenheimer offense. Dak Prescott is like almost always top 3 in catchable throw rate. It's him and Joe Burrow, based on the analytics, are like the most consistently accurate quarterbacks in football. And so Dak Prescott always top 3, but last year he was one of the least accurate quarterbacks before his injury. Him and CeeDee Lamb both talked about this. They felt like their chemistry was off because CeeDee Lamb, had the holdout for much of training camp and whatnot. But yeah, accuracy, once again, off the charts for Dak Prescott. Really liked a lot of what I saw. And I still really like your call, Theo, that we could be looking at Dallas as the NFC's Cincinnati Bengals, where Dak Prescott's Joe Burrow, T. Higgins is George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb is Jamar Chase. I think Dallas's defense looked a little bit better than I expected, or maybe Eagles offense a little worse or hurt. But yeah, I still think that's a really good call.
Yeah, that'll be a really, really fun one. And Dak was locked in. I think the narrative changes a lot if they win that game. And if CeeDee Lamb catches those balls in the fourth quarter, I think they win that one. So yeah, nothing to really worry about when it comes to Dak. Javonte Williams, we could talk about him, but you want to read the Everything Report. You get even more again at the running back position. The only other quarterback, and I'll get your lightning round take on this one. Are you optimistic on Daniel Jones moving forward? Weird trend here, Scott. 2 years in a row, we've had a reclamation project quarterback who is drafted as a QB3 and finishes as a QB1. Baker Mayfield in 2023, Sam Darnold in 2024. Could it be Daniel Jones in 2025?
You know what? I think Ryan and I are least surprised about this of anyone, but it is still has to be, a little surprising. But Daniel Jones, like always way more productive for fantasy than he gets credit for. He's sort of like Justin Fields light, where maybe, he's not playing great from an in real life perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, it's good at way more rushing upside than he gets credit for. His scramble rate before that ACL was on par with Jaden Daniels. He has exactly as many career games with over 90 rushing yards as Mike Vick and Cam Newton. And, it's kind of easy to make excuses for Daniel Jones. With the Giants, he always had a bottom 3 offensive line and a bottom 3 receiving core. Like that's how the worst supporting cast every year of his career. And now he's a great supporting cast. It's a top 7 offensive line. It's a top 7 receiving core. They have 4 great wide receivers, a great pass catching tight end, and they have a great play caller, one who's like great for fantasy due to the high pace of play that Steichen loves. And he's, something of a QB whisperer, at least he was for Justin Herbert, for Jalen Hurts, not Anthony Richardson, who is productive for fantasy, but, the least accurate quarterback since Tim Tebow. So yeah, I could kind of see this sticking. I will just say the big caveat here is Miami probably has the worst secondary in football. But don't be surprised if Daniel Jones and this Colts offense is a lot better than anyone expects. Don't forget too, Jonathan Taylor didn't have any rushing touchdowns in this game. But I the record that was cited on Red Zone, I don't know if you heard it, Theo, but first quarterback in like a century to score on every single one of his drives. Jaden Daniels did that a number of times if you count kneel downs, but not counting kneel downs. And so, I think it's real to a degree.
Yeah, and this is the fun week because if Indianapolis is the real deal, then they're going to beat Denver at home, and Denver might have the best defense in the NFL right now. I'm buying into Daniel Jones. The offensive line's really good. You mentioned Jonathan Taylor, an absolute workhorse in the backfield. I think DJ Giddens is a plus handcuff as well. Definitely big-time contingent upside. If you're looking for somebody to roster on the back end of your roster, consider DJ Giddens. But when you get past Denver, they have a chance to really rip off a couple of wins. They play the Tennessee Titans in week 3. They play the Rams in week 4, which is a very tricky game. And then they have a couple of other very winnable ones. Las Vegas comes into Indianapolis in week 5. So if they can get Denver this week, I think that the narrative and the buzz with Indianapolis, I think they might have to be looked at as the favorite in the AFC South. Let's talk about his tight end, though. Tyler Warren looked absolutely awesome. And this is sort of a trend for School of Scott. We could talk about a number of tight ends, but we're going to specifically look at 2 rookie tight ends. Spoiler alert. You want to read more about the tight ends, go and check out the Everything Report on Fantasy Points. Use the code Theo for 15% off the Fantasy Points subscription. But Scott, I'll put it to you like this. True or false, Tyler Warren is a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season.
Yeah, probably top 6 for sure. I think a lot hinges on this one thing, which is that Josh Downs only had a 50% route share and a 10% first read target share. He's been hurt since mid-August. I wonder if week 3, that's at 75%, 80% of a route share. And, Warren then is competing with Josh Downs for the short area work. And you kind of see Downs as the PPR cheat code. But no, the main storyline here is Tyler Warren's usage volume was incredible. He looked amazing. And I think the cards flipped over, and it's like, oh, the right answer at the tight end position was Tyler Warren. What was the wrong answer? It was everyone else.
Yeah.
Extremely bullish on Tyler Warren. Monitor Josh Downs usage, but like that's just a minor thing. That's just like, is he this year's Brock Bowers for sure, or is he, just the best value.
Yeah, and I think that people are going to get themselves into trouble, and there's going to be a lot of bombastic takes, not on fantasy points, but on other sites where they're going to say, "Oh, Tyler Warren's this year's tight end one." Don't think he's going to be the tight end one. Michael Pittman looked fully healthy. Pittman, you talked about him in the Everything Report. Michael Pittman looked fully healthy, and him like being sort of what he was 2 years ago would be a huge benefit to this entire Colts offense. But with Tyler Warren, you get all those targets. You also get the manufactured rush attempt. I think that Warren's a major problem for Josh Downs. We'll see, though. We're going to learn a lot more about Indianapolis with a much tougher opponent. Miami is one where we might look back 6 weeks from now and say we have to throw all usage against the Miami Dolphins away because everybody's beating up on them. Mike McDaniel might be headed out the gate. So Tyler Warren got steamed up in ADP. He was going right alongside Sam Laporta. We saw specific one-off drafts in FFPC and NFFC out in Vegas where Tyler Warren was like Tyler Warren no matter what drafters who were taking him a half a round, full round ahead of Sam Laporta. But one player who was continually drafted, but in the double-digit rounds, there was positive drumbeats all off-season long, but we didn't anticipate it would be this quick out the gate. Harold Fannin Jr., also alongside Warren, ties the NFL record for the most receptions by a rookie tight end in game one. Fannin was awesome. Leads Cleveland in total targets, leads Cleveland in target share, gets a manufactured rushing attempt. And the big takeaway for me, Scott, was just how quickly they wanted to use him. Had 3 catches in the first quarter and that run. Harold Fannin Jr. is a thing. Do you agree on that one?
Yeah. And also, just to make that stat even cooler, is last year Fannin and Warren set the record for most receptions by a tight end in a college football game all time. And then they just set this, week one record for a rookie tight end. So I wrote a lot of words on this, breaking down the range of outcomes, which is kind of how I think about every player. And I think that's how we should all, treat fantasy. So the bull case argument is he's Cleveland's Brock Bowers, or he's Cleveland's Jordan Matthews. He's just this overgrown slot wide receiver with tight end eligibility in fantasy. And he's a PPR cheat code and he's going to keep smashing. I mean, the base case is he's Cleveland's Jonnu Smith, whether that's Atlanta era Jonnu Smith or Miami era Jonnu Smith. I don't think we could say for certain, but basically what that means is a 50 to 65% route share with a ton of screen targets and whatnot. And then the bear case scenario is he's this year's Isaiah Likely. If you don't remember last year, Isaiah Likely had his best fantasy game by a mile in week one. And then week 2 on, he averaged like 6 fantasy points per game. It was a weird week one where Baltimore played 12 personnel 55% of the time. I don't think they were over 40% in any other game. And, it could have just been due to matchup. It could just be because Isaiah Bond, who was supposed to get drafted in round 2, only joined the team 11 days ago. But he's going to eventually be the clear number 3. And we see Fannin as more of a glorified juice check. Anyway, I wrote a bunch of words weighing these ranges of outcomes. And I think him being like a real big fantasy difference maker is a long shot. Even though this is a player I loved, like I was stupidly high on him. He was my pre-combine tight end too. You can read my article, Analytics Darlings, for how much I love this class, and I love Fannin. Stupidly high on. I think it's still a long shot. But that said, because upside is more valuable than downside is detrimental, this is a player you absolutely want to go out of your way to try and add to your team. You're the fab guru. You're the high stakes expert, but I put it at 20 to 25%. I know you like tight end premium, so maybe bump that up from there. But what did you have it at?
Yeah, I mean, he's not available in any FFPC league of mine. So like FFPC drafters were all over it. And even NFFC drafters were drafting him towards the end of the summer. I think if you were in a FFPC league and Harold Fannin was available, I think you've got to go 65% of your fab because there's a chance you get a top 8 tight end. And Scott, you talked about how he's like this overgrown wide receiver. They don't have anything. It's Thrash as the wide receiver 3 role. Jerry Jeudy or Cedric Tillman goes down. There's so many teams in the NFL where if the wide receiver of note, if either starter goes down, usually it's another wide receiver who benefits. There's some teams like Philly where we'll say, oh, Dallas Goedert sees a bump in his target share. But when it comes to Cleveland, Fannin would go absolutely nuts if Jeudy missed time or if Tillman missed time. You'd basically be getting a wide receiver, low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 production with tight end eligibility and spike week potential. David Njoku, I'm not too worried about Njoku. I think these two can coexist, but I think there's also a chance that David Njoku gets traded. There was rumors last year that he was going to get traded at the deadline. So Fannin has so many outs, and the fact that he was one of the youngest tight ends in the NFL, and they're using him this much in game 1 in a game against Cincinnati where they should have won this game. Cleveland should have won this game. They had a better kicker. They were winning this game. So I would go absolutely nuts. I think if you're in an NFFC league, you still want to go north of 20%. I think he's a difference maker potentially at the tight end spot. One tweet you dropped today, or excuse me, a post on X, since we're not saying tweet anymore, a post you dropped today that was really fire was kind of talking about two tight ends, how there's really not a terrible historical samples of two tight ends thriving in fantasy football off of the same team. Maybe talk about the little bit, because I thought that was sort of the best cold water situation.
Yeah, I honestly don't. So it's just so rare to ever see two tight ends in a environment that's hospitable for fantasy. Last year, there was only one instance of two tight ends on the same team having 30 routes, and it was that likely Andrews game, which a lot of people chase, but turned out to be an aberration. I actually don't even think that's the most compelling anti-Fannin argument. I think it's Isaiah Bond, and I know I'm kind of alone on an island about that, but my model really liked him. I have sources with one team, the only team who gave us an answer on what draft grade they had on Bond, told us that they had a round 2 grade on him. It's just, the legal issues that have since been resolved, turn him into a UDFA. But I mean, the guy joined the team 11 days ago, ran 11 routes. I think that's really encouraging. And then it's also, this is a team that could be tanking. It could just be totally dead in week 8. Dylan Gabriel or Shadur Sanders are starting. But I just can't shake that upside argument. So I'm with you. I do think you need to be aggressive on Fannin. For Njoku, I think it's really bad, because it's not that his snap share actually went up in week 1 versus last year. So it's not like he's eating into Njoku's snaps or routes. It's just how Njoku wins is that short area work, the manufactured yak role. And that kind of all just went to Fannin, who had 3 times the first read target share of Njoku. I think it's low end tight end 1, fringe tight end 1, could be even worse than that. I checked Mike Clay's rankings today. He had Njoku still tight end 6, tight end 7. He had Fannin tight end 20. He's not buying into it, but I don't know. I think it's pretty bad for Njoku.
Yeah, Mike Clay's got to pop the film in if you're going to put Harold Fannin at tight end 20. I mean, shout out. We'd love to have you on the pod, Mike, but yeah, might want to rethink that ranking this week. Harold Fannin's probably a little closer to tight end 10 than tight end 20 based off that usage. And it's just sort of a glass ceiling thing where we've seen rookie tight ends back-to-back seasons break glass ceilings. And again, with Warren and with Fannin, I think it's just all historical comps need to kind of go away a little bit. It's what have tight ends been able to do recently. Maybe Cleveland figures out how for these two guys to sort of coexist. And we do have something we haven't ever seen where it's we've seen it, but we're talking about like New England Patriots with Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski. Maybe we get 2 tight ends from the same team finishing as like top 12, top 14 scorers at the position. It's such a low bar, Scott, for points per game to get into tight end 1 land. And I think we can both agree both players are really good and are not battling with like these mega alpha wide receivers on this team. So, and also I think Cleveland could be functional offensively. If Flacco stays at quarterback, they get Quinshon Judkins back. We liked what we saw out of Dylan Sampson. They could be a little better than expected. So really, really fun one. Let's go quickly through some of these wide receivers. And again, you're going to be able to find more information on tight ends, more information on a ton of wide receivers in Scott's Everything Report. Go check it out over on fantasypoints.com. We got to talk about Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka with 2 touchdown grabs. Baker Mayfield looked for him in the clutch. Absolutely looks the part, Scott.
Yeah, looking great for both of the late round. Actually, all the Exodia wide receivers. Rashee Rice was one of the biggest winners of the week, and he didn't even play a snap. You saw Hollywood Brown get that 16 targets after Xavier Worthy went down. Tet McMillan, great. But then Emeka Egbuka and Ricky Pearsall, really impressive. Pearsall, 6th most receiving yards on the week. We already talked about that. But Egbuka, the 2 touchdowns. There was the story that Mike Evans said, I wish we were mic'd up because Emeka called the game winner. He called for that play. He knew he was going to get open. For a player where just the vibes were unreal, the drum beat was incessant. You lined up all over the field. Have to be really bullish on Egbuka.
Yeah, it's sort of, he's almost like a cult hero at this point. It's like you talked about it. So like you couldn't have designed a better summer for him, where it was just the constant drum beats. Then you had Chris Godwin missing time. Now you have Baker Mayfield looking for him in the clutch, and he delivers. And it was a come from behind win against a divisional opponent. Egbuka is a locked in wide receiver 2 with a ton of juice. I think when we're drafting next year, you might be talking about Egbuka as a 2nd round pick. Another player who I think is going to be drafted alongside of him in round 2, a player that we were really bullish on this offseason, and usage-wise, there was a ton of promise with Teteroa McMillan. When it comes to Carolina, what I can't stress how disappointed I was in Carolina collectively as a team in game 1. Wanted to see a lot more out of Bryce Young, completely controlled by Jacksonville. But McMillan looks like he's going to be the only show in town in the pass catching department. You could cut pretty much any other Carolina Panthers a receiving option right off of your roster. McMillan's going to have some spike weeks, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, he looked awesome. His volume was great. He only JSN, Zay Flowers, CeeDee Lamb, and Puka Nacua had a higher yardage share than McMillan. He was the clear focal point. He actually had 2 more targets than you'll see on this stat sheet. They got negated due to penalty, but it was really just Bryce Young was awful. He had the worst passer rating of any quarterback in the week. We got bad Bryce Young, but if we get back to second half of the season last year, Bryce Young, like that should have been a 22-point outing from Tet McMillan.
Yeah, Bryce Young was like a bottom 4 quarterback this weekend, but I think that the bottom 1 quarterback was definitely Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is categorically awful at football. What week do we see Jackson Dart take over, Scott? What's your vibes with this one? Just your general feeling. I asked the same thing to Joe Dolan and Tom Brawley on our waiver pod. Joe took a very smart answer. Joe's a sharp guy, and Joe said, I wouldn't start him until we get Andrew Thomas back. And I'm kind of like, what's the point, though? Get him out on the field. Are you kind of there with Dart?
Yeah, I think it's going to be week 4, which is after the Chiefs game. I think you need Andrew Thomas there. Like, look at the Giants without Andrew Thomas stats over the last however many years. It's just a totally non-functional, non-viable offense. You saw Cam Scadaboo's goal line carry. He almost got tackled by his own offensive lineman. It was horrible. They're just so unserious without Andrew Thomas. So yeah, for a Jackson Dart, you want to preserve him, protect him. You don't want to just throw him into the flames. So let's get Andrew Thomas back. Let's get out of the Chiefs matchup. And then it's Jackson Dart season, baby. That's when Malik Neighbors is putting up prime DeAndre Hopkins target volume. Is basically everyone just like, oh, he might be better than Justin Jefferson. And then Cam Scadaboo is basically the Mike Allstott of Christian McCaffrey's.
Yeah, we're going to wait for Marshall Chalk. We're going to talk about him throughout the year. I'm sure, Scott, better days ahead.
I warned you guys in the draft guide and in my prospect article, this might be my new Elijah Moore. So I might not be thinking rationally here.
Well, there we go. But you're definitely thinking rationally throughout the Everything Report. We didn't even cover half the guys that you and Ryan Heath gave incredible takeaways from. Scott, we did it all throughout the offseason. I think we should continue doing it week in, week out here. Definitely not something that we put on the show sheet. This is going to be vibes based, but I think that the two of us should drop a bold prediction for the week every single week right here on School of Scott. Week 2, a lot of intriguing games here. Do you want me to go first, or do you? I know you got one in your bag because you got the DFS brain on as soon as the Everything Report is finished being written. So you got a couple players I know you like this week. Do you have a particular player that you think goes nuts, puts up a huge one, or another bold prediction?
Can you go first?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I can go first on this one. Okay. I'm going to go with Kayshon Boutte. And I think Kayshon Boutte this week, or Kayshon Boutte, I'll pronounce it Boutte. That's fine. Kayshon Boutte this past week had a really, really strong performance. I had 8 targets, had 6 catches, went over 100 yards as a receiver. I think there's going to be people that leave him on waiver wires and just are sort of like, it's not a guy I'm going to add to my team. It's probably a one-off fluke. I think he goes for 100 yards again. I think we're going to see 7 catches, 110 yards, and finds the end zone. I think Kayshon Boutte is going to be the player you wanted to add this week in week 1 waivers. Gets that soft Miami Dolphins defense that gave up a touchdown to Michael Pittman. I think that Kayshon Boutte finds the end zone this week. 23 years old. I think he's a guy we're going to be talking about in these next upcoming weeks in fantasy football as one of Drake May's preferred weapons. And I think New England does get that big win against the Miami Dolphins on the road.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like it. I probably could have came up with something better with a little bit more time, but I think I'm going to go with Calvin Ridley is going to have a top 6 week. I think everyone's forgetting about him just because he got locked up by Patrick Surtain, but that's every wide receiver. You saw in the preseason, Cam Ward just lock on to his guy, Calvin Ridley. So I think against this Rams defense, I think Calvin Ridley could have a nice little 120-yard game, let's say.
Yeah, Calvin Ridley game that everybody would love to see that one. Elic Iamaner, some really positive stuff there. Read about Ridley, read about Iamaner on Fantasy Points data. Some very promising usage numbers when it comes to Elic Iamaner. Scott, let me know sort of what's the rest of the week look like for you content-wise. Where can people find what else you're doing for the rest of the week?
Yeah, so after this podcast goes up and Everything Report is live, I will shift all my focus to DFS. So you can see me on Outside the Box on Saturday. You can read my slate breakdown on Saturday, my show with Johnny Sunday morning, and I'll be in Discord all throughout the rest of the week.
Yeah, and make sure if you're listening to this show on the podcast, you go and take a look at our YouTube channel as well. Give us a subscription to YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, and we have a very big growing YouTube audience at Fantasy Points, we were the fastest growing YouTube audience of any fantasy football site. Make sure you're also subscribing to the podcast. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps us out a lot. Check out all my articles over at Fantasy Points, and make sure you're checking out Fantasy Football Daily. I'm dropping 4 episodes a week. You can find that anywhere you get your podcast, and multiple Fantasy Football Dailies will also be over at Fantasy Points YouTube. And I have Heath Cummings of CBS coming on Dynasty Life. Dynasty Life this week is going to be lit. Heath and I are going to talk about some of these Dynasty Rankings risers. We're going to go over some of the breakout performances and get you ready. We're everywhere at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your leagues, not only in week 2, but for the rest of the season. I think we both wish we had more exposure to was Travis Etienne. We do have one share on a team that we split with Abib Agbatoba. where we kind of took him begrudgingly, Scott. But man,
just to put it mildly, I think I scolded Habib.
Yeah.
I gave him the hardest time. Like, oh, you took Etienne? Why do we have Etienne on this? Shout out to Habib. We streamed a number of drafts with him. He's arguably the greatest high stakes fantasy football player ever. 2-time winner of the Big Gorilla, consecutive years even. So fantasy football millionaire legend, Habib, shout out. I will say, like, I don't want to back off my priors here. Like, I think it's just only a matter of time until Basil Tootin goes crazy. So you had Pete Prisco saying, they traded Tank Bigsby so we would finally see Tootin in the Bucky Irving role. And a number of people, Jordan Schultz, reporting, he was a superstar in training camp. And so I don't want to back off my priors here. But yeah, for sure. I mean, it looks like Travis Etienne, it's a nice little ADP beater, potentially a bell cow for September. But I do have my priors here. What do you think, Theo?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just it's a smoke 'em if you got him situation. If you've got Travis Etienne, use him as long as you can here, because if you're a dynasty manager, you're not going to be able to really sell high, because I think the dynasty community is still sort of apprehensive about him after just such regression that we saw from him. But I think if you have him rostered, just start him until the wheels fall off. I'm with you. Basil Tootin now has another window of opportunity where maybe it's a situation like we saw with Devon Achane his rookie year, where it's going to be Basil Tootin rips off just a couple of really long runs in some big debut performance, or it could be a little bit more of a slow drip. But I do think at some point this year, Basil Tootin is going to have a window of opportunity. He is a fantastic stash, an even better one with Tank Bigsby, now a Philadelphia Eagle.